You feel it before you even realize what's happening. That tightness in your chest, that subtle quickening of your pulse. Someone has just questioned your choice, and suddenly your mind is racing, assembling a defense for a decision that belonged entirely to you. The words tumble out faster than you intended. You're explaining why you left the gathering early, why you said no to the request, why you chose the path that felt right, even though it looked different from what they expected. And with every sentence, you feel yourself shrinking. You're listing reasons, like evidence in a trial you never agreed to attend. Your voice takes on that apologetic edge, softening every statement with qualifiers and justifications. You watch their face for signs of approval, for that subtle nod that says you've finally said enough, that you've earned the right to your own decision. But often that nod never comes. Instead, they ask another question. They poke at your logic. They offer what they would have done, as if your choice required their endorsement to be valid. And you keep explaining. You walk away from these conversations feeling strange, emptied. There's a heaviness in your body that you can't quite name. It's not just exhaustion, though you are tired. It's something deeper. You've just spent 10 minutes defending a choice you made with care and intention, and somehow you feel less certain about it now than you did before the conversation began. You feel guilty for disappointing them, small for needing something different, confused about whether you even had the right to choose what you chose. This is the exhaustion of justification. It's the weight of living as if your life is a thesis that requires constant defense, as if every boundary, every preference, every decision must be accompanied by a footnote explaining why you're allowed to want what you want. You've been doing this so long that you don't even notice it anymore. The explanations come automatically, like breathing. Someone raises an eyebrow and your mouth opens, words already forming before you've consciously decided to speak. You explain why you're tired, as if fatigue requires a backstory to be legitimate. You explain why you're changing careers, offering a detailed cost-benefit analysis to people who aren't paying your bills. You explain why you can't attend the event, listing every conflicting obligation as if your presence is something you owe and must formally request to withhold. You explain your parenting choices, your eating habits, your relationship status, your weekend plans. You explain and explain and explain until you've turned your entire existence into a performance of logic, hoping that if you can just articulate it perfectly enough, everyone will finally understand and approve. But here's what you've begun to suspect, even if you haven't said it out loud yet. The understanding never comes. Not really, because the people who demand explanations aren't usually seeking to understand you. They're seeking to change you, to realign your choices with their comfort, to maintain a sense of control over a life that was never theirs to control. Your explanations don't satisfy them because satisfaction was never the goal. The goal was the performance itself. The goal was watching you justify your existence, which reinforces an unspoken hierarchy where their approval is the currency and your autonomy is always up for negotiation. And every time you offer an explanation you don't owe, you accept the terms of that negotiation. You teach them that your decisions are discussions, that your boundaries are proposals subject to revision, that your life is something they have a vote in. And you teach yourself something even more damaging. You teach yourself that you cannot be trusted, that your inner knowing requires external validation to be real, that the quiet voice inside you that says this is right or this is what I need is not enough on its own. It must be vetted, approved, understood by others before it can be honored. This is the hidden cost of constant justification. It doesn't just exhaust you, it erodes you. It erodes your confidence, because confidence is built on self-trust, and you cannot trust yourself while simultaneously seeking permission from everyone around you. It erodes your relationships, because people begin to sense that you're not fully present, that you're performing a version of yourself designed to minimize their discomfort rather than expressing who you actually are. It erodes your peace, because there is no rest in a life where every choice feels like a test you might fail. You've been carrying this weight for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to move without it. But here's what I want you to know, what I need you to hear before we go any further. This pattern is not a character flaw. It's not evidence of weakness or insufficiency. It's a learned behavior, wired into you by experiences that taught you over-explaining was the price of safety, acceptance, or love. And because it was learned, it can be unlearned. You can change this, not by becoming colder or less caring, but by reclaiming something that was always yours. The right to make decisions without a jury present. The right to exist as yourself without performing a defense of that existence. By the end of this journey, you're going to understand why you've been trapped in this exhausting cycle. You're going to see the invisible wiring that taught you justification equals safety, and why that equation no longer serves you. You're going to learn what this pattern has cost you emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. And most importantly, you're going to learn how to stop. Not by crafting better explanations, not by learning more persuasive language or developing a thicker skin, but by learning when to withhold explanations entirely, by developing the quiet confidence to state your truth without defending it, by trusting yourself enough that other people's understanding becomes optional rather than essential. This is a reclaiming of your power, of your dignity, of your inner peace. And I want you to notice something right now, something you've probably observed, but never fully considered. The most confident people you've ever met don't explain themselves more than everyone else. They explain themselves less. Think about it. Picture someone in your life who moves through the world with that calm, grounded presence. Someone who seems unbothered by others' opinions, who makes decisions and lets them stand without apology or justification. They're not rude, they're not unkind, but they're also not performing. They don't treat every choice like a debate. They state what they need, what works for them, what they've decided, and then they're done. They don't spiral into justifications. They don't soften every boundary with an apology. They simply exist as themselves and allow others to have whatever reaction they're going to have. That's not arrogance. That's self-trust, and it's available to you. Not someday, when you finally become perfect or fearless. But now, starting today, through a series of small, deliberate choices to reclaim the energy you've been spending on explanations no one truly needed and redirect it toward living the life you've been too busy defending to fully inhabit, you're about to learn why you started over-explaining in the first place. You're about to understand the neuroscience behind the compulsion, the childhood conditioning that wired it into you, the social forces that rewarded it. You're going to learn a simple, repeatable method for communicating your truth without justification. You're going to practice that method in low-stakes situations until it becomes natural. And then, you're going to apply it when it matters most, when the pressure is highest, and the stakes feel enormous. And somewhere in that process, something will shift. You'll stop trying to become someone who doesn't over-explain. You'll simply be someone who doesn't. The performance will fall away, the exhaustion will lift, and you'll discover that the person you've been defending all this time didn't need defending at all. They just needed permission to exist. And the only person who could grant that permission was you. This is where it begins, not with shame for how much you've explained, but with curiosity about why, and with a promise that the freedom waiting on the other side of this pattern is worth every moment of discomfort you'll move through to reach it. You've been on trial long enough. It's time to step down from the witness stand. Let's bring this into focus. Let's look at what this actually looks like in your life, in real time, in moments that might feel so familiar they almost hurt to recognize. You're having coffee with a friend, and you mention that you're leaving your job. You're excited, actually. Nervous? Yes, but certain. You've thought this through. You've weighed the options. You know in your bones that this is right. But the moment you say it out loud, you see their face change. The eyebrows lift. The head tilts. And then come the questions. Really? But I thought you loved that job. What happened? Did something go wrong? Have you found something else? Is it the money? What are you going to do about health insurance? Have you thought about how this looks on your resume? And suddenly you're not having coffee anymore. You're building a case. You're listing every logical reason why this decision makes sense, even though 30 seconds ago you weren't asking for their approval. You explain the toxic culture you've tolerated for too long. You detail the new opportunity, making sure it sounds impressive enough. You walk them through your financial calculations, your backup plans, your timeline. You hear yourself talking faster, your voice taking on that defensive edge, that subtle pleading tone that asks them to understand, to agree, to validate that you're not making a mistake. You leave that conversation feeling strange, hollow. What should have been a moment of sharing something important has become an interrogation you didn't see coming. And the worst part? You're less certain now than you were before. Their questions have planted seeds of doubt that you'll spend the next 3 days obsessing over. Maybe you didn't think it through. Maybe you're being impulsive. Maybe they see something you don't. Or picture this. You're at a family gathering, and someone makes a comment about how you're raising your child. It's wrapped in concern, maybe even love, but it's a criticism nonetheless. They think you're too strict, or too lenient, or too focused on academics, or not focused enough. And before you can even breathe, you're defending yourself. You're explaining your parenting philosophy, citing articles you've read, describing the careful thought you've put into every choice. You're justifying why you do bedtime the way you do it, why you limit screen time, why you said no to the sleepover, why you chose that school, that approach, that boundary. And they're nodding, but you can see it in their eyes. They're not convinced. They still think they know better. And you keep talking, adding more details, hoping that if you can just explain it perfectly enough, they'll finally see that you're not failing, that you're trying, that you're doing your best. You walk away from that gathering with your jaw clenched. There's resentment pooling in your chest. You gave them a thesis on your own parenting choices, choices you made with love and intention, and it still wasn't enough. They still looked at you like you're getting it wrong. And beneath the resentment is something worse. Shame. The creeping suspicion that maybe they're right. Maybe you are too strict. Maybe you are messing it up. Maybe you do need to explain yourself better. Try harder. Justify more thoroughly. Or maybe it's at work. You finally set a boundary you should have set months ago. You tell your coworker you're not available to cover their shift this weekend. It's a reasonable boundary. You've covered for them 3 times already this month. You have plans. You need rest. You're allowed to say no. But the moment you say it, you see their reaction, the slight frown, the pause that feels loaded with judgment, and suddenly you're scrambling to soften it. You're apologizing before they've even responded. You're explaining that you really wish you could help, but you have this family thing, and you've already committed, and you're so sorry, and maybe next time, and you feel terrible about this. You've turned a simple no into a performance of guilt. And even after all that explaining, they're still annoyed. They make a comment about how they've always been there for you, how they thought you were a team player. And you spend the rest of the week feeling like you've done something wrong by having a boundary at all. This is the hidden tax of constant justification. It doesn't just cost you time and energy, though it costs you both. It costs you your relationships. It costs you your peace. It costs you your sense of self. Because here's what happens in the aftermath of these moments. You walk away and the resentment builds. You're angry at them for questioning you, for demanding explanations you didn't owe. But you're also angry at yourself. Angry that you gave those explanations. Angry that you cared so much about their approval. Angry that you felt small and defensive instead of calm and certain. The resentment sits in your body like a stone. It colors how you feel when you see their name on your phone. It makes you dread the next conversation. It builds a wall between you and them, brick by brick, interaction by interaction. And then there's the confusion. You explained yourself thoroughly. You gave them your reasoning, your logic, your heart. And they still didn't understand. They still judged. They still questioned. So what was it all for? Was your explanation not good enough? Should you have said it differently? Should you have included more details or fewer? You replay the conversation in your head, editing and revising, crafting the perfect response you wish you'd given. But it doesn't matter, because the conversation is over and the damage is done. Worse than the resentment and confusion is the shame spiral that follows. You start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are making a mistake with your career. Maybe you are messing up as a parent. Maybe your boundaries are selfish. Maybe you do owe people explanations, and the problem isn't that you're over-explaining, but that you're not explaining well enough. Maybe if you were smarter, clearer, more articulate, you could finally make them understand. Maybe the issue is you. This is what constant justification does to your relationships. You become smaller around certain people. You know who they are. The ones whose approval feels essential. The ones whose questions make your stomach drop. The ones you start editing yourself around, carefully choosing what to share and what to hide, because you've learned that honesty comes with an interrogation you don't have the energy for. You stop telling them about your dreams because they'll ask if you're being realistic. You stop sharing your struggles because they'll offer solutions you didn't ask for and then judge you if you don't take them. You stop being yourself because yourself requires too much defending. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You lie in bed at night, preparing your defense for a criticism that hasn't even been spoken yet. You anticipate their questions and craft your answers. You practice your tone, making sure it sounds confident but not arrogant, certain but not closed off, clear but not harsh. You're trying to thread an impossible needle to be understood by people who may not actually be trying to understand you at all, and you feel perpetually on trial. Every choice you make feels like evidence that will be examined, questioned, weighed. You second-guess yourself constantly. Not because you don't know what you want or need, but because you've learned that wanting and needing are not enough. They must be justified, explained, approved by an invisible jury of everyone whose opinion you've given power over your peace. This is the loop, and it's vicious. When you over-explain, you train others to question you. You signal that your decisions are up for debate, that your boundaries are negotiable, that you're willing to perform justifications for the cost of their comfort. They learn that if they push back, if they raise an eyebrow or ask just one more question, you'll cave, you'll soften, you'll explain. And in that explanation, they'll find more things to question. The loop continues. But you're also training yourself. Every time you justify a choice that needed no justification, you teach yourself that you can't be trusted, that your inner knowing is not enough, that the voice inside you that says this is right must be overruled by the voices outside you that say prove it. You're eroding your own confidence, one explanation at a time. You're teaching yourself that approval from others is more important than alignment with yourself. And the cruelest part, that approval may never come. You can explain perfectly, logically, thoroughly, and some people still won't understand. Some people still won't agree. Some people will find new reasons to question you no matter how airtight your defense. Because the issue was never your explanation. The issue is that they want something from you that you're not giving, and no amount of words will change that. So you're stuck in a loop that feeds doubt, erodes confidence, and keeps you performing for approval that remains perpetually out of reach. You're exhausted, you're resentful, you're confused. And beneath it all, you're losing touch with the person you actually are beneath all the justifications. You're losing the ability to simply know what you know, to want what you want, to choose what you choose, without a jury present, without a defense prepared, without the weight of everyone else's opinions pressing down on you like a hand on your chest, making it hard to breathe. This is the problem. Not that you're bad at explaining, but that you've been explaining when you should have been trusting, that you've been defending when you should have been deciding, that you've been performing when you should have been living. And it's costing you everything. But before you can change this pattern, you need to understand where it came from. And here's the first thing you need to hear, the thing that might begin to soften the shame you've been carrying about this. Over-explaining is not a character flaw. It's not evidence that you're weak or broken or too sensitive. It's a learned survival strategy. Your nervous system developed this response because, at some point in your life, it kept you safe. It worked. And your brain, brilliant and adaptive as it is, held on to it because that's what brains do. They remember what kept you alive, what minimized pain, what secured connection, and they repeat it, over and over, long after the original threat has passed. So let's go back. Let's look at where this started. Maybe you grew up in a home where your choices were interrogated, where nothing you did was simply accepted, but everything was questioned. Why did you choose that friend? Why did you want to quit that activity? Why didn't you do better on that test? Your parents, perhaps with good intentions, taught you that your decisions required their approval, that your feelings needed to make sense to them before they were valid, that you couldn't just want something or feel something. You had to justify it. And maybe they didn't have to justify anything to you. When you asked why, you were met with, "Because I said so." Their authority was self-evident. But yours? Yours had to be earned, explained, defended. You learned early that there was a hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, your inner world was subject to review by those above you. Or maybe love felt conditional in your home, not in obvious ways. Nobody said, "I'll only love you if you explain yourself." But you felt it. You felt that approval came when you were good, when you were right, when you were understood. And when you made choices they didn't understand, the temperature in the room changed. You saw disappointment in their eyes. You felt the subtle withdrawal of warmth. And your young nervous system learned a crucial equation. Explanation equals reconnection. If you could just make them understand, if you could just articulate your reasoning well enough, the warmth would return. The approval would come back. You would be safe again. So you started explaining everything. Not because you were naturally inclined to justify your existence, but because you learned that justification was the price of love. Maybe you learned that explaining yourself kept you safe from anger. You had a parent with a temper or a caregiver whose moods were unpredictable, and you discovered that if you could explain your choices before they got angry, if you could preemptively justify your actions, you could sometimes avoid the storm. You became hypervigilant, scanning for signs of displeasure, crafting explanations before questions were even asked. Your brain built a reflex: detect potential criticism, offer justification, neutralize threat. This is what trauma-informed psychology calls a fawn response. When fight, flight, and freeze aren't options, when you're small and dependent, and the threat is coming from someone you need, you learn to appease, to perform, to make yourself non-threatening by explaining, justifying, shrinking. It's not weakness, it's brilliance. It's your nervous system finding a way to survive in an environment where your autonomy was not safe. And here's what's happening in your brain during all of this. Your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, is learning to categorize certain social cues as dangerous. A raised eyebrow, a questioning tone, a moment of silence after you've stated a boundary. These become signals that trigger your stress response just as powerfully as a physical threat would. Your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases. Your thinking narrows. And your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, goes offline. You're no longer making a conscious choice to explain. You're reacting, surviving. This is the neuroscience of anxious attachment. If you grew up with inconsistent emotional availability, with caregivers who were sometimes warm and sometimes withdrawn, your nervous system never learned that you're safe by default. Instead, it learned that safety must be constantly negotiated. That connection requires vigilance, that you must monitor other people's emotional states and adjust yourself accordingly to maintain the bond. So you developed hypervigilance. Your brain built a scanning system that's always running in the background, always monitoring for signs of judgment or disapproval. And when it detects those signs, it launches into explanation mode before you've consciously decided to speak. You're not choosing to over-explain. Your nervous system is trying to protect you, using a strategy it learned decades ago. But it's not just your family of origin. The culture you grew up in taught you this too. If you're a woman, you were likely taught to soften everything, to apologize for taking up space, to couch every boundary in justification and every no in an apology. You were rewarded for being accommodating, for making others comfortable, for explaining yourself in ways that minimized their discomfort with your autonomy. You Learned that a direct no sounds harsh, but a no wrapped in 3 paragraphs of explanation sounds considerate. You learned to perform emotional labor, to manage other people's reactions to your boundaries by preemptively justifying them. If you're a people pleaser, you were taught that your worth comes from being helpful, from saying yes, from not causing problems. And when you couldn't say yes, you learned to cushion the no with so much explanation that it almost felt like a yes. You learned that disappointing people is dangerous, that conflict must be avoided, that your needs are only legitimate if they come with a reasonable explanation that others can't argue with. If you're a high achiever, you were taught that rest must be earned, that you can't just want a break. You have to justify it. You have to prove you've worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, accomplished enough to deserve downtime. You learned to explain your exhaustion as if it's on trial, to list your productivity as evidence that you've earned the right to stop. You internalized the message that your humanity is conditional, available only after you've met some invisible threshold of output. All of these messages, from family and from culture, wired you to believe that your existence requires a defense, that you must constantly justify your right to make choices, to have needs, to take up space, to be who you are. And this wiring continues into adulthood in ways you don't even notice anymore. The explanations come automatically. You think it's politeness when you apologize for leaving a gathering early. You think it's consideration when you offer a detailed backstory for why you can't take on an extra project. You think it's clarity when you walk someone through your entire decision-making process for a choice that was entirely yours to make. But beneath the politeness, beneath the consideration, beneath the clarity, there's fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of conflict. Fear that if you don't explain, if you simply state your truth and let it stand, something bad will happen. They'll be angry. They'll think you're selfish. They'll withdraw their love or respect or approval. They'll see you as difficult, unkind, unreasonable. So you explain, not because you want to, but because you are afraid of what happens if you don't. And your brain has been running this program for so long that it feels like the truth. It feels like you're just being a good person, a clear communicator, someone who values connection. But if you look beneath the surface, if you feel into the sensation in your body when you're mid-explanation, you'll notice it's not peace. It's not confidence. It's anxiety. It's the subtle hum of a nervous system on high alert, trying to manage a threat that may not even be real. This is why you can't just decide to stop over-explaining and have it work. Because you're not dealing with a bad habit. You're dealing with deeply wired neurology and years of conditioning that taught you this behavior was necessary for survival. But here's what I want you to understand. Here's the compassion you need to hold as we move forward. This pattern kept you safe once, when you were young and dependent, when you didn't have the option to leave or set firm boundaries, when your survival genuinely depended on the approval and stability of the adults around you. Over-explaining worked. It minimized conflict. It secured connection. It helped you navigate an environment where your autonomy wasn't respected or your feelings weren't safe. Your nervous system deserves credit for that. It found a way to protect you. It adapted. It kept you going. But now it's keeping you small. You're not that child anymore. You're not dependent on those same people for survival. You have choices now that you didn't have then. You can leave conversations that feel like interrogations. You can choose which relationships to invest in. You can trust your own decisions without needing external validation. But your nervous system doesn't know that yet. It's still running the old program, still scanning for threats that look like the ones from your past, still deploying the same survival strategy, even though the context has completely changed. And that strategy, which once protected you, is now limiting you. It's costing you your confidence, your peace, your energy, your relationships. It's keeping you trapped in a performance of justification when what you actually need is permission to simply be. It's time to rewire. Not because you were wrong to develop this pattern, but because you've outgrown it. Not because you're broken, but because you're ready to trust yourself more than you fear other people's reactions. Not because the old way was bad, but because there's a new way available now that will serve you so much better. And that rewiring begins with understanding, with seeing this pattern clearly, without shame, as the adaptation it truly is. You're not over-explaining because something is wrong with you. You're over-explaining because something was once wrong around you, and you learned to cope. And now you're learning something new. Now that you understand where this pattern came from, you need a map. You need to see where you are, where you're going, and what the journey looks like in between. Because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages. And knowing which stage you're in makes all the difference between feeling lost and feeling like you're making progress, even when it's hard. There are 4 stages to this transformation, 4 levels of mastery when it comes to how you explain yourself, how you communicate your truth, and how you hold your ground. You're going to move through all of them. Some stages will feel comfortable, others will feel excruciating, but each one is necessary. Each one builds the foundation for the next, and each one brings you closer to the freedom you're seeking. Let's start with where most people are, where you likely are right now. Stage 1 is unconscious justification. This is the stage where you explain everything to everyone without realizing it. Your default mode is defense. Someone asks where you're going, and you give them your entire itinerary plus the reasoning behind each stop. Someone comments on your appearance, and you're suddenly explaining your outfit choices, your morning routine, your budget. You don't notice you're doing it. The explanations just flow out of you like breathing, automatic, reflexive, constant. In this stage, you genuinely believe you're just being a good communicator, thorough, considerate, clear. You think the problem is that other people don't understand you, so you keep trying to make them understand by offering more information, more context, more justification. You don't see the pattern yet. You don't realize that you're exhausting yourself by treating every conversation like a deposition. You don't notice until someone points it out, if they ever do, or until you hit a wall of exhaustion so profound that you can't ignore it anymore. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You feel resentful, and you're not sure why. You start avoiding certain people or situations, and you tell yourself it's because you're busy, but really, it's because you don't have the energy to explain yourself one more time. This stage can last years, decades even. Most people never leave it. They spend their entire lives justifying their existence to an audience that may not even be paying attention. They think this is just how relationships work, how communication happens, how you maintain connection. They don't know there's another way. But you're not going to stay here. Because now you're becoming aware. And awareness is the doorway to stage 2. Stage 2 is aware but compulsive. This is where you start noticing when you're over-explaining, but you can't stop. The urge is too strong. You're mid-sentence, listing reason number 4 for why you made a particular choice, and part of you is watching yourself do it, thinking, "Stop talking. You don't owe them this. Why are you still talking?" But you can't stop. The words keep coming. The anxiety is too high. The fear of what happens if you don't explain is louder than the part of you that knows you're giving too much. You catch yourself after the conversation is over. You replay it in your mind and cringe at how much you said, how defensive you sounded, how small you made yourself. You feel frustrated. You know better now. You see the cage. But you haven't found the key yet. You're trapped between knowing you shouldn't over-explain and not being able to do anything else. This is the most uncomfortable stage, because awareness without agency feels like torture. You're conscious of the problem, but seemingly powerless to change it. You start to wonder if you'll ever be able to break this pattern, or if you're just doomed to watch yourself do it forever. Here's what you need to know about stage 2. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. That discomfort is not evidence that you're failing. It's evidence that you're changing. Your nervous system is being asked to do something it has never done before, to not deploy a strategy that has kept you safe for years. Of course it's going to resist. Of course the urge to explain will feel overwhelming. Your brain is trying to protect you using the only method it knows. But you're building new neural pathways. Every time you notice yourself over-explaining, even if you don't stop, you're strengthening your awareness. You're creating distance between the stimulus and the response, and that distance, however small, is where choice lives. You'll be in this stage for a while. That's okay. You're not stuck. You're integrating, and every moment of awareness is moving you closer to stage 3. Stage 3 is selective sharing. This is where you begin choosing when to explain and when to simply state your truth. You start discerning between people who have earned access to your inner world and people who haven't, between conversations that invite genuine connection and conversations that are just veiled criticism wearing the mask of curiosity. It feels awkward at first, maybe even rude. You tell someone you can't make it to their event, and you stop yourself before launching into the reasons why. You just say, "That doesn't work for me." And then you sit in the silence. Your heart is pounding. Your palms might be sweating. Every instinct in your body is screaming at you to fill the space with justification, to soften the boundary, to explain yourself until they're comfortable again. But you don't. You let the silence sit. You breathe through the discomfort, and you discover something remarkable. The world doesn't end. They might be surprised. They might push back. They might ask why. And you get to decide if you want to answer. Not because you owe them an answer, but because you choose to give one. This is where you start to learn discernment. You begin to notice the difference between someone who is genuinely curious about your life and someone who is simply critical. Genuine curiosity feels open. It asks questions without agenda. It accepts your answers without needing to change them. Criticism, on the other hand, feels like an interrogation. It picks at your logic. It offers what you should have done instead. It doesn't actually want to understand you. It wants to correct you. And once you can tell the difference, you start responding differently. With people who are genuinely curious, who have shown up for you, who respect your autonomy, you might choose to share your reasoning. Not because you have to, but because it deepens the connection. It's a gift you're offering, not a tax you're paying. But with people who are critical, who have a history of questioning your choices, who seem to want you to live according to their preferences rather than your own, you stop defending. You state your truth and let it stand. You don't engage with their pushback. You don't offer more information, hoping they'll finally understand. You simply say, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm comfortable with my decision." And then you change the subject or end the conversation. This stage requires practice, lots of it. You'll mess up. You'll over-explain sometimes and then kick yourself for it. You'll under-explain other times and wonder if you were too harsh. That's normal. You're learning a new skill, and like any skill, it takes repetition to become natural. But with each interaction, you're building the muscle. You're teaching yourself that you can state a boundary without justification and survive. You're proving to your nervous system that you're safe even when you're misunderstood. And slowly, gradually, you start to move into stage 4. Stage 4 is integrated confidence. This is where explanation is no longer a reflex, it's a choice. You speak with clarity and calm because you're not afraid of other people's reactions anymore. You're not trying to control their feelings or manage their opinions. You're simply stating your truth and allowing them to have whatever response they're going to have. You offer context when it serves connection. When you're with someone you trust, someone you love, someone who has earned the right to hear your story, you share freely. Not because you're defending yourself, but because sharing your inner world with safe people is one of the joys of being human. You let them in because you want to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. And you withhold context when it would only feed judgment. When you're with someone who has a pattern of criticizing you, of questioning your choices, of trying to make you live according to their values instead of your own, you don't engage. You state what you need to state and you're done. You don't owe them your reasoning. You don't owe them access to your thought process. And you're no longer afraid to let them be uncomfortable with your boundaries. You trust yourself. That's the core of stage 4. You trust that you've made the best decision you could with the information you had. You trust that your needs are legitimate, even if others don't understand them. You trust that you can handle whatever comes, including disapproval, including misunderstanding, including conflict. And that trust is evident in how you show up. Your voice is steady. Your body language is calm. You're not performing anymore. You're just being. People notice the shift. Some will respect it immediately. They'll appreciate the clarity, the directness, the confidence. Your relationships with these people will deepen because you're no longer hiding behind explanations. You're showing up as yourself, and they're meeting you there. Others will push back. They'll be uncomfortable with the change. They'll test your boundaries, trying to pull you back into the old dynamic where you explained yourself, and they got to have an opinion about your life. And you'll hold firm. Not with hostility, but with calm certainty. And some of those people will adjust. They'll learn the new terms of the relationship, and some won't. They'll fade away, and you'll discover that's okay, because you're no longer willing to shrink yourself to keep people who don't actually see you. This is the stage where you become someone who doesn't need to explain, not because you're cold or closed off, but because you're clear. You know who you are. You know what you value. You know what you need. And you no longer require external validation to trust that knowing. Most people live in stage 1 their entire lives. They never become conscious of the pattern. They exhaust themselves explaining and never understand why relationships feel so heavy, why they're always tired, why they can't seem to trust themselves. But you're not going to be most people. You're going to move through all 4 stages. You're going to do the uncomfortable work of becoming aware, of sitting with the compulsion without acting on it, of practicing selective sharing even when it feels awkward, of building the kind of integrated confidence that can only come from trusting yourself more than you fear other people's reactions. And the freedom waiting on the other side is worth every uncomfortable moment, worth every conversation where you had to bite your tongue, worth every relationship that shifted or ended, worth every time you felt the urge to explain and chose silence instead. You're going to get there, one stage at a time, one choice at a time, one breath at a time. Now let's give you something concrete, a tool you can use today in the next conversation that asks you to defend yourself. This is the foundation of everything else you're going to learn. It's simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. It's called the boundary statement, and it's about to become your new default. Here's the structure. It's so straightforward you might be tempted to dismiss it. Don't. I've decided X. I'm not available for Y. That doesn't work for me. Full stop. Period. End of sentence. No apology trailing behind it. No lengthy backstory explaining your reasoning. No softening words like, unfortunately, or I'm so sorry but, or I really wish I could but. Just the statement. Clear, calm, complete. This is a declaration, not a negotiation. You're not arguing your case. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're not seeking approval or permission. You're simply stating a fact about your life. And facts don't require justification. The sky is blue, water is wet. You've decided not to attend the event. These are all statements of reality, and none of them need a defense. Let me show you how to deliver it. Because the words matter, but so does everything else. Your voice should be steady. Not loud, not aggressive, but firm. Imagine the tone you'd use to tell someone your name or your address. Neutral, matter of fact. You're sharing information, not making an argument. Your body language should be calm and open, not defensive. No crossed arms, no looking at the floor, no apologetic hand-wringing, but also no puffed chest, no pointing fingers, no aggressive posturing. You're grounded, present. You're not shrinking, but you're not attacking either. You're simply there, in your body, stating what's true for you. And then you stop talking. This is crucial. You deliver the boundary statement, and then you pause. You let silence do the work. You don't rush to fill the space with explanations. You don't monitor their face for signs of approval and adjust your words accordingly. You just let your statement land and give them space to respond. Let's walk through some real scenarios so you can see what this looks like in practice. Someone invites you to an event. Maybe it's a party, a gathering, a celebration, and you don't want to go. In the old pattern, you'd launch into a detailed explanation. You'd tell them how tired you've been, how many social obligations you've had this month, how you're trying to prioritize rest, how you really wish you could be there, but you're just so overwhelmed right now. You'd apologize 3 times and offer to make it up to them later. But now you try something different. They ask if you're coming. You say, I'm not coming to the event. And that's it. You don't list reasons. You don't perform exhaustion to prove your tiredness is legitimate. You don't apologize for having a preference that's different from what they want from you. It's going to feel abrupt. Your nervous system is going to sound alarms. You're going to feel the urge rising in your throat to add because, and then launch into justifications. Don't. Breathe. Let the statement stand, or maybe you've decided to change careers. This is a big one. In the old pattern, you'd offer everyone a thesis. You'd walk them through the timeline, the reasons, the financial analysis, the pros and cons list. You'd cite other people's success stories to prove it's possible. You'd acknowledge all the risks to show you've thought it through. You'd basically try to convince them before they even questioned you. But now you try the boundary statement. Someone asks about work. You say, "I've decided to change careers." Period. You don't justify it with logic or defend it with research. You don't reassure them that you know what you're doing. You simply state the decision as fact, because it is a fact. It's your life, your choice, your path, and their understanding is optional, or someone asks you to take on something, a project at work, a favor for a friend, an obligation that doesn't align with what you need right now. In the old pattern, you'd explain your entire schedule. You'd list every commitment, every responsibility, every reason you're already stretched thin. You'd try to make them see how impossible it would be for you to add one more thing. But now you use the boundary statement. They make the request. You say, "That doesn't work for me." You don't explain your schedule, your energy levels, your other commitments. You don't share your feelings about why this doesn't fit. You don't recount past experiences where you said yes and regretted it. You just state the simple truth. This doesn't work for you. And that's enough. I know what you're feeling right now. Even reading these examples, you're probably feeling uncomfortable. It feels rude, abrupt, cold even. Your mind is already generating objections. But what if they ask why? But what if they think I'm being difficult? But what if they get upset? But what if I hurt their feelings? Let me be direct with you about this discomfort. It's supposed to be there. Your nervous system has been trained for years, maybe decades, to believe that explanation equals safety, that justification prevents conflict, that oversharing keeps you connected. So when you withhold those explanations, your nervous system interprets it as danger. It's screaming at you that you're being unkind, that you're going to damage the relationship, that something bad is about to happen. But here's the truth. Your nervous system doesn't know yet. You're not being unkind. You're being honest. You're being clear. And you're teaching people something essential about how to be in relationship with you. You're teaching them that your decisions are not up for debate, that your boundaries are not negotiations, that you respect them enough to be direct rather than hiding behind a wall of justifications that neither of you actually need. The discomfort you're feeling is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something new. And new always feels uncomfortable before it feels natural. Your job is not to eliminate the discomfort. Your job is to act despite it. Now, I want to address something important, the follow-up, because there's a difference between someone who is genuinely curious and someone who is demanding an explanation. If someone responds to your boundary statement with genuine curiosity, you can choose to share more. Notice I said choose, not required. If they say, "Oh, I didn't know you were thinking about changing careers. What's drawing you in that direction?" and their tone is open, interested, respectful, then you might decide to share your reasoning, not because you owe it to them, but because it might deepen the connection. Because you want to let them into your inner world. Because sharing with safe people is a joy, not a burden. But that's a gift. You're choosing to give them access to your thought process because they've shown they can hold it with care. You're not defending yourself. You're sharing yourself. And there's a world of difference between those two things. If, on the other hand, someone responds with judgment or demands an explanation, you don't engage. If they say, "What do you mean you're not coming?" "Why not? That's so unlike you. Is everything okay?" You should really be there. You don't take the bait. You don't start listing reasons to satisfy their interrogation. You simply repeat or slightly reframe your boundary statement. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not available. And then you redirect the conversation or end it if needed. You're looking for the quality of their curiosity. Are they asking because they want to understand you better, or are they asking because they want to change your mind? The first deserves your consideration. The second deserves your boundary. This is going to take practice. So much practice. You're going to mess up. You're going to deliver a perfect boundary statement, and then, 3 seconds later, hear yourself launching into explanations anyway, because the silence felt too uncomfortable. That's okay. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be different than you've been. And different takes repetition. Start small. Practice with low-stakes situations. The telemarketer who calls. The acquaintance who asks about your weekend plans. The stranger who comments on your choices. Use these moments to build the muscle of stating your truth without justification. Notice how it feels in your body. Notice the urge to explain and practice breathing through it without acting on it. Notice that nothing terrible happens when you simply state what's true for you and stop talking. And as you practice, remind yourself of this. My choices are not a court case. I am not on trial. You don't need to present evidence for the jury. You don't need to anticipate the prosecutor's questions and prepare your defense. You don't need to convince 12 people of your innocence. You're not guilty of living your life according to your own values, your own needs, your own inner knowing, and you don't need anyone's verdict to proceed. Your choices are yours. Your boundaries are yours. Your life is yours, and the boundary statement is how you start reclaiming all of it. I've decided X. I'm not available for Y. That doesn't work for me. These sentences might be some of the most powerful words you'll ever speak, not because they're elaborate or impressive, but because they're true, and because they mark the moment you stopped asking permission to exist as yourself. Practice them. Use them. Trust them. And watch what happens when you start stating your truth without apology, without justification, without performing for an audience that doesn't get to decide how you live. You're not being difficult. You're being clear. And clarity, it turns out, is one of the kindest things you can offer both yourself and the people around you. The boundary statement is your foundation. But life is complex, and people are unpredictable, and you're going to encounter situations where a simple statement isn't enough, where someone pushes back, where your own nervous system rebels, where the context demands more nuance than a single sentence can provide. So let's expand your toolkit. These are advanced methods that build on what you've already learned, giving you more options, more flexibility, more ways to hold your ground when the pressure increases. Let's start with the redirect. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to deliver your boundary statement, clear and calm, and someone is going to push back. They're going to demand an explanation. They're going to say things like, "But why?" or "That doesn't make sense," or "You should really reconsider." They're going to try to pull you into a debate about your own life, and you're not going to take the bait. Instead, you're going to use the redirect. It sounds like this. I appreciate your concern, but I'm comfortable with my decision. And then, immediately, you change the subject. You ask them about their week. You comment on something in the environment. You pivot the conversation somewhere else entirely. Notice what you've done here. You've acknowledged their response without engaging with it. You've shown that you heard them, which often diffuses some of the tension, but you haven't opened the door to negotiation. You've stated that you're comfortable, which is a gentle but firm assertion that this isn't up for discussion. And then you've moved on, signaling that the topic is closed. The key is in the transition. You don't pause after, "I'm comfortable with my decision," and wait for their response. You don't give them space to launch another question. You immediately redirect, smoothly and naturally, as if the previous topic is simply done and you're moving forward together into new territory. This takes practice. Your instinct will be to wait, to see if they accept your boundary, to monitor their reaction. But that pause is an invitation for them to push harder. So you practice the seamless pivot, statement, redirect, forward motion. It's a dance, and you're learning the steps. Now let's talk about the pause, because the hardest person to manage in all of this isn't the friend who questions you, or the family member who pushes back. It's you. It's your own nervous system, screaming at you to explain, to justify, to fix the discomfort by filling the silence with words. So when that urge arises, and it will, you're going to pause. Physically pause. Take 3 breaths, deep ones, in through your nose, out through your mouth. While you're breathing, you're doing several things at once. You're creating space between the stimulus and your response. You're interrupting the automatic pattern that would have you explaining before you've even decided to. You're letting the wave of anxiety crest and begin to subside without acting on it. And you're giving yourself time to choose your next words intentionally rather than reactively. Let the silence sit. I know it feels excruciating. I know every second of quiet feels like an hour. I know your mind is generating catastrophic scenarios about what this silence means, what they're thinking, how you're damaging the relationship. But you're not. You're just breathing. And silence is not dangerous. It's just unfamiliar. Notice the discomfort. Don't try to make it go away. Just observe it. Feel where it lives in your body. Is it a tightness in your chest, a flutter in your stomach, a heat in your face? Name it. This is anxiety. This is my nervous system doing what it was trained to do. I'm safe. I can feel this and still choose differently. And then, after those 3 breaths, you choose your words. Maybe you decide to share something. Maybe you repeat your boundary. Maybe you redirect. But whatever you say, it's coming from a place of intention, not compulsion. You're choosing, not reacting. And that makes all the difference. The pause is a practice. You'll forget to use it sometimes. You'll be mid-explanation before you remember you meant to breathe first. That's okay. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to slowly increase the number of times you catch yourself before the words come, to gradually build that space where choice lives. Next, we have the internal check-in. This is a question you ask yourself before you explain anything. It's simple but profound. Am I sharing this to create understanding, or am I defending myself against imagined judgment? Take a moment with this. Because there's a world of difference between the two, and you need to be able to tell them apart. Sharing to create understanding feels like openness. It's an invitation. You want to let someone into your inner world because it will deepen the connection, because they've shown they can hold your truth with care, because the sharing itself brings you closer. There's no urgency in it, no desperation. You're not trying to prevent something bad from happening. You're just offering a piece of yourself because it feels right. Defending against imagined judgment feels like anxiety. It's protective. You're preemptively explaining, because you're afraid of what they might think if you don't. You're trying to control their perception of you, to make sure they don't misunderstand or disapprove. There's urgency in it, a racing quality. You feel like if you don't explain well enough, something bad will happen. They'll think you're selfish or careless or wrong. When you catch yourself about to explain something, pause and ask the question. Check in with your body. What's driving this urge to share? If it's fear, if it's the need to control their reaction, if it's defense against judgment they haven't even expressed, then stop. You don't need to say it. Breathe through the urge and let it pass. If it's genuine desire to connect, if it's openness without agenda, if it's sharing without needing them to validate or approve, then proceed. But now you're doing it consciously, as a choice, not as a compulsion. Here's another tool, one that might sound simple but is surprisingly powerful. The permission slip. You're going to write yourself a note, either on actual paper or in your mind, that says, I have permission to disappoint others. I have permission to be misunderstood. Read it. Say it out loud if you're alone. Let the words land. Because somewhere deep inside, you don't believe this yet. You believe that disappointing others is a catastrophe to be avoided at all costs, that being misunderstood is a failure of communication that you must immediately correct, that your job in relationships is to manage other people's feelings about your choices. But it's not. Your job is to be honest, to be yourself, to make the choices that align with your values and your needs, even when those choices don't make sense to everyone around you. And sometimes, in the process of doing that, people will be disappointed. They wanted something from you that you couldn't give. They expected you to choose differently. They're uncomfortable with your autonomy. And that's okay. Their disappointment is not evidence that you've done something wrong. It's evidence that you're two different people with different needs and preferences. You have permission to let them feel what they feel without changing your decision to accommodate them. You also have permission to be misunderstood. Not everyone is going to get you. Not everyone is going to understand why you made the choice you made, why you need what you need, why you're drawn to what you're drawn to, and you don't need them to. Your life doesn't require a unanimous vote of approval. You don't need consensus. You just need your own clarity and the courage to honor it. When the guilt arises, and it will, revisit the permission slip. Remind yourself that you are allowed to be human, which means you're allowed to be complex, to have needs that inconvenience others, to make choices that don't make sense to everyone. You're allowed to take up space in your own life. Finally, let's talk about the context filter. Because not every situation is the same, and not every person deserves the same level of access to your inner world. You need to be able to discern, is this person safe? Have they earned access to my reasoning? Or are they simply demanding compliance disguised as curiosity? Safe people have certain qualities. They respect your boundaries even when they don't understand them. They ask questions from a place of genuine interest, not interrogation. They can hold your truth without trying to change it. They've shown up for you consistently. They've proven that they can be trusted with your vulnerability. These people have earned access. When they ask, you can choose to share more, knowing it will be received with care. Unsafe people have different patterns. They question your choices regularly. They offer unsolicited advice, disguised as concern. They can't seem to accept your boundaries without pushing back. They make your decisions about them, about how your choices affect their comfort or convenience. Their questions feel like tests. They're looking for holes in your logic, waiting for you to slip up so they can tell you what you should have done instead. With safe people, you can offer context, share your process, let them into your reasoning. With unsafe people, you hold the line, boundary statement, possibly a redirect, and nothing more. You're not being mean. You're being wise. You're recognizing that not everyone has earned the privilege of understanding you, and that's okay. Your inner world is not a public space. Access is granted, not assumed. This context filter helps you avoid the trap of treating everyone the same. You're not going to become someone who never shares, who walls themselves off completely. You're becoming someone who shares selectively, wisely, with people who have proven they can hold what you offer without using it against you. These tools, all of them, are here to expand your emotional range, to give you options beyond the binary of over-explaining or shutting down completely. You're learning to be flexible, to read situations, to respond with nuance rather than reflex. And here's what I need you to hear. These tools don't make you cold. They don't make you unkind or closed off or difficult. They make you clear. They make you boundaried. They make you someone who knows the difference between generosity and self-abandonment, between connection and performance, between sharing and defending. And clarity, it turns out, is one of the kindest things you can offer. To yourself, first, because you stop exhausting yourself with explanations nobody needed. You stop giving away your energy to people who weren't going to understand anyway. You stop performing for approval and start living from alignment. But also to others. Because when you're clear, people know where they stand with you. They don't have to guess. They don't have to decode your long-winded explanations to figure out what you actually mean. You tell them directly, and then you trust them to handle their own feelings about it. That's respect. That's trust. That's what real connection looks like. You're building something here. A new way of being in the world. One tool at a time. One conversation at a time. One breath at a time. Now we need to talk about sustainability. Because learning these tools is one thing. Living them, day after day, year after year, is another. And if you want this transformation to last, if you want to become someone who genuinely doesn't over-explain, rather than someone who's constantly white-knuckling their way through conversations, you need to build a life that supports this new way of being. This isn't about tactics anymore. This is about architecture. This is about designing your environment, your relationships, your daily rhythms in ways that make the new pattern easier than the old one. This is about creating conditions where not over-explaining becomes natural, default, effortless. Let's start with the most important factor, your circle. The people you surround yourself with. Your nervous system doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's constantly shaped by your environment, constantly adapting to the people around you, constantly learning what's safe and what's dangerous based on the feedback it receives. And if you're spending most of your time with people who constantly question you, who criticize your choices, who demand justification for your every move, your nervous system is going to stay on high alert. It's going to keep deploying the old survival strategy because, in that environment, it's still necessary. You need to curate your circle. Spend more time with people who respect your autonomy, people who hear your boundaries and accept them, people who trust that you're the expert on your own life, people who ask questions from curiosity, not criticism, people around whom you can just be, without performing, without defending, without shrinking. And you need to limit exposure to people who drain you, the ones who make you feel like you're constantly on trial, the ones who question everything, the ones who can't seem to respect your choices without trying to change them. I'm not saying you have to cut everyone off, but you can be strategic. You can see them less. You can keep the interactions shorter. You can guard your energy around them, knowing they're not safe for your full truth. This isn't mean. This is wisdom. Your environment shapes your nervous system. If you're trying to learn to trust yourself while spending all your time with people who teach you that you can't be trusted, you're working against yourself. Choose relationships that let you breathe. Choose people who make the new pattern easier, not harder. Next, you need to establish consistent boundaries early and often. Not just the big ones. The small ones matter even more. Think of boundary setting like lifting weights. You don't start with the heaviest weight. You start light. Build the muscle. Increase gradually. The same principle applies here. You don't wait for the high-stakes moment to practice your boundary statement. You practice with the small stuff, the minor requests, the low-pressure situations. Someone asks if you want to grab coffee and you don't. Say no without explanation. That doesn't work for me, but thanks for thinking of me. No apology, no detailed schedule, just the simple truth. Someone asks you to volunteer for something, and you're not interested. I'm not available for that. Full stop. Don't list your other commitments to prove you're busy enough to deserve a no. Someone comments on your choice, your outfit, your plans, whatever. Practice not engaging. Practice the redirect. Practice letting their opinion exist without needing to defend yourself against it. These small moments are where you build the muscle, where you prove to your nervous system that you can state a boundary and nothing terrible happens, where you teach the people in your life that your decisions aren't up for debate. And when the big moment comes, when someone questions a major life choice, the boundary feels less foreign. You've already practiced it 100 times in smaller ways. Your nervous system knows the pattern. It trusts that you can handle it. You also need rituals of self-trust, daily practices that reinforce your inner authority, that remind you that you're the expert on your own life. Start with journaling, but not the way you might think. Don't journal to process or analyze or figure things out. Journal to practice stating your decisions without justifying them. Right, I decided to say no to that event. And then stop. Don't follow it with 3 paragraphs about why. Just state the decision and let it be. You're training yourself to trust that your choices are valid simply because you made them. Or try affirmations that center your worth. Not generic positivity, but specific reminders of your right to autonomy. My choices are valid without explanation. I trust my own judgment. I am allowed to change my mind. My needs matter. Say them out loud. Write them down. Let them sink into your nervous system until they feel true. And celebrate yourself when you hold your ground. This matters more than you think. Your brain learns through reinforcement. When you successfully deliver a boundary statement without spiraling into justification, mark it. Acknowledge it. Feel proud of it. You're teaching your brain that this new behavior is good, worthy of celebration, something to repeat. Don't wait for other people to validate your growth. Validate it yourself. Here's another foundational shift that needs to happen. You need to reframe rest and pleasure. If you're someone who over-explains, chances are you're also someone who treats rest as something that must be earned. You think you can only justify downtime if you've worked hard enough, produced enough, sacrificed enough. You think pleasure is an indulgence that requires a defense. You've internalized the message that your worth is tied to your output, and so resting feels like you're doing something wrong. This has to change, not just because it's exhausting, though it is, but because as long as you believe rest requires justification, you'll keep explaining it. You'll keep defending your need for downtime as if it's on trial, and that keeps you trapped in the old pattern. Rest is not an indulgence. It's a biological necessity. Your body and mind need recovery time. They need space to process, to heal, to integrate. This isn't something you earn through productivity. It's something you need simply because you're human. Pleasure is not frivolous. Joy is not optional. The things that make you feel alive, connected, present in your body, these are not extras you add to your life after you've checked all the boxes. They're essential components of a life worth living. So stop treating them like they need a defense. Normalize rest. Build it into your routine. Take the day off without listing everything you've accomplished to deserve it. Spend the afternoon doing something just because it brings you joy, not because you can justify its productivity value. And when someone questions it, when they ask why you're resting or what you're doing with your free time, practice your boundary statement. I'm taking time for myself. That's the whole answer. You're teaching yourself a new equation. Not, I've earned this rest through sufficient suffering, but I need this rest because I'm human. The shift is subtle, but transformative. Finally, let's talk about designing your communication defaults, because some of you are over-explaining in text and email as much as you are in person, and it's draining you in ways you might not fully realize. You send a message declining an invitation, and it's 3 paragraphs long. You're explaining your schedule, your energy levels, your competing obligations, your genuine wish that you could be there. You're apologizing twice. You're offering to make it up to them. And by the time you hit send, you're exhausted from the mental labor of crafting that response. So you're going to create templates, simple, polite, firm responses that you can use without spiraling. Thanks for the invitation. I won't be able to make it, but I hope you have a great time. I appreciate you thinking of me, but that doesn't work for my schedule. I'm not available for that. Let me know if there's something else I can help with. These aren't rude. They're clear. They respect both your time and theirs, and they save you from the exhausting loop of drafting, editing, deleting, rewriting, trying to find the perfect words that will make them understand without making them upset. Keep these templates somewhere accessible. In your Notes app, on a sticky note by your computer, wherever you'll see them when you need them. And when someone makes a request or sends an invitation, use the template. Copy, paste, send. Don't edit it to make it softer. Don't add 3 more sentences to cushion it. Trust the template. It's enough. This might feel mechanical at first, like you're not being authentic or personal. But here's the truth. Your authentic self is not the person who writes 3 paragraphs of justification. That's your anxious self, your people-pleasing self, your over-explaining self. Your authentic self can be kind and clear in 2 sentences. Trust that. All of these foundations work together. The curated circle gives you a safe environment to practice. The consistent small boundaries build your confidence. The rituals of self-trust reinforce the internal shift. The reframing of rest removes one of the biggest sources of unnecessary justification. And the communication defaults make the new pattern sustainable in your daily life. This is how you build a life that requires fewer explanations. Not by constantly battling the urge to explain, but by creating conditions where that urge arises less and less, where you're surrounded by people who don't demand justifications, where you've proven to yourself 1,000 times that you can state a boundary and be okay, where rest isn't something you defend, but something you honor, where your default responses are already clear and boundaried. Imagine waking up in that life, where your choices are simply yours, where you make a decision and it just stands, without the background noise of imagined interrogations, where you move through your days without the constant hum of guilt, without rehearsing defenses, without performing your reasoning for an invisible jury, where you say no and you don't spend the next 2 hours wondering if you should have said yes, where you set a boundary and you don't immediately start justifying it in your head, where you make a choice that confuses or disappoints someone, and you let them have their feelings without changing your decision or explaining it away. That life is possible. It's not some distant destination you'll reach after years of perfect practice. It's being built right now, one choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of trusting yourself more than you fear their reaction. You're constructing it, foundation by foundation. And every time you choose differently than you used to, you're adding another stone to the structure. Keep building. It's working. Now let's ground everything you've learned in science. Because this isn't just philosophy or self-help rhetoric. What you're experiencing, what you're working to change, is rooted in neurobiology and psychology. Understanding the mechanics behind the pattern doesn't just satisfy intellectual curiosity. It strengthens your belief that change is possible. It removes the last traces of shame, and it gives you a clearer map of what you're actually rewiring. Let's start with your amygdala. This almond-shaped structure deep in your brain is your threat detection system. It's ancient, evolutionarily speaking. It developed millions of years ago to keep you alive in a world full of physical dangers. When it detects a threat, it triggers your stress response. Heart rate increases, breathing quickens, blood flows to your muscles. Your body prepares to fight, flee, or freeze. Here's what's crucial to understand. Your amygdala can't tell the difference between a physical threat and a social one. When you perceive judgment, when someone questions your choice or criticizes your decision, your amygdala responds the same way it would if you encountered a predator. It interprets social rejection or disapproval as danger, because for our ancestors, social rejection often meant death. Being cast out of the tribe meant no protection, no resources, no chance of survival. So when someone raises an eyebrow at your boundary, when they ask why with that particular tone, when you sense their disappointment, your amygdala sounds the alarm, threat detected, and your nervous system has to respond. But here's where it gets interesting. You can't fight someone's disapproval. You can't run from their judgment, not when you're standing right in front of them. And freezing doesn't resolve the threat. So your nervous system reaches for another option: appeasement. If you can just explain yourself well enough, if you can make them understand, if you can neutralize their disapproval by justifying your choice, maybe the threat will go away. Maybe they'll approve. Maybe you'll be safe again. Over-explaining is a nervous system response. It's not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's your brain trying to protect you from what it perceives as danger, using a strategy that once worked. And every time you successfully avoid conflict through explanation, every time someone's disapproval softens after you justify yourself, you reinforce the neural pathway. You teach your amygdala that this strategy works, that explanation equals safety. The pattern deepens. But there's a cost to this strategy that goes beyond exhaustion. Let's talk about your prefrontal cortex, the The prefrontal cortex is the most evolutionarily recent part of your brain. It's responsible for executive function, decision-making, planning, impulse control, rational thought. It's also incredibly energy-intensive. It requires glucose and oxygen to function well, and it has limited capacity. Every time you justify yourself, every time you defend a decision or craft an explanation, you're using your prefrontal cortex. You're pulling from your cognitive resources. And those resources are finite. This is what psychologists call decision fatigue or ego depletion. The more you use your mental energy on one thing, the less you have available for everything else. Think about what happens after a conversation where you've over-explained yourself into exhaustion. You feel drained. You can't think clearly. You don't have energy for creative work or meaningful connection. You're depleted. That's not just emotional tiredness. That's literal neurological depletion. You've burned through your cognitive reserves defending yourself, and there's nothing left for living your life. Now contrast that with someone who states their truth without justification. They're not using those resources. Their prefrontal cortex is available for creativity, for problem solving, for presence, for joy. They have more energy because they're not spending it on constant justification. This is part of why confident people seem to have more vitality, more clarity, more capacity. They're not draining themselves in defense of their own existence. Let's talk about locus of control. This is a concept from psychology that describes where you believe control over your life resides. People with an external locus of control believe that external forces, other people's opinions, luck, or circumstances determine their outcomes and their worth. People with an internal locus of control believe that their own choices, values, and actions are what matter most. If you over-explain, you likely have an external locus of control when it comes to your self-worth. You believe, consciously or unconsciously, that other people's understanding and approval determine whether your choices are valid. You've outsourced your sense of okayness to the people around you. Their judgment matters more than your own. Their opinions carry more weight than your inner knowing. This is why you keep explaining. You're trying to secure their approval, because without it, you don't trust that you're on solid ground. Your worth feels contingent on their verdict. Shifting to an internal locus of control is key to transformation. This means learning to trust that your choices are valid because you made them, not because others understand them. It means recognizing that your worth is inherent, not earned through the approval of others. It means building an internal compass that guides you more powerfully than external opinions ever could. And here's what research shows. People with an internal locus of control are happier, more resilient, and more successful across virtually every measure. They're not constantly at the mercy of other people's reactions. They're grounded in their own values, and that groundedness gives them a stability that no amount of external approval can provide. Now let's talk about something fascinating: mirror neurons and social contagion. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing to that action. They're part of how we learn, how we develop empathy, how we understand others. But they also mean that emotions and behaviors are contagious. When you are around someone who's anxious, your mirror neurons fire in a similar pattern, and you begin to feel anxious too. When you're around someone who's calm, you tend to calm down. This has profound implications for how you show up. When you stop over-explaining, when you state your boundaries with calm certainty, You're not just changing your own nervous system. You're influencing the nervous systems of the people around you. Your confidence is contagious. Your certainty gives others permission to trust themselves. Your calm in the face of their potential judgment teaches them, on a neurological level, that they can be calm too. This is why confident people seem to change the energy of a room. It's not magic. It's mirror neurons. Their nervous system regulation spreads to others. And when you develop that same calm certainty, you'll notice something remarkable. The people who used to push back on your boundaries start accepting them more easily. Not because you've gotten better at explaining, but because your nervous system is communicating something different. It's communicating that you're not afraid, that you're grounded, that this isn't up for negotiation. And their mirror neurons pick up on that. You're not just healing yourself, you're subtly teaching everyone around you that boundaries are normal, that autonomy is safe, that people don't have to justify their existence. Confidence is contagious, and you're about to become a vector for it. Let's talk about attachment theory, because it's deeply connected to how you communicate your needs and boundaries. Attachment theory describes the patterns we develop in early childhood based on how our caregivers responded to us. Secure attachment forms when caregivers are consistently responsive and attuned. Insecure attachment, in various forms, develops when that responsiveness is inconsistent, absent, or conditional. People with secure attachment have an easier time stating their needs and boundaries without excessive justification. They learned early that their needs are legitimate, that expressing them doesn't threaten connection, that they can be autonomous and still be loved. They developed what's called earned security. They trust themselves, and they trust that relationships can handle honesty. People with anxious attachment, on the other hand, learned that love is conditional, that they have to work for connection, that their needs might be too much, so they over-explain. They try to make themselves more palatable. They justify their existence, hoping it will secure the bond. They're constantly scanning for signs of rejection and trying to prevent it through appeasement. If you recognize yourself in anxious attachment, here's the good news. Attachment styles can heal. They're not fixed. Through new relational experiences and through deliberate practice, you can develop earned, secure attachment. You can learn, even now, that your needs are legitimate, that boundaries don't destroy connection with safe people, that you can be fully yourself and still be loved. And healing your attachment style heals your communication. As you develop more internal security, as you learn to trust that you're okay, even when others are disappointed, your need to over-explain naturally decreases. You're not using willpower to stop justifying yourself. You're becoming someone for whom justification is no longer necessary, because your sense of safety doesn't depend on constant approval. All of this brings us to the core insight. This transformation isn't about willpower. It's not about positive thinking or deciding to be more confident. Those approaches fail because they're trying to override your neurology with conscious intention, and your neurology is stronger. Your nervous system will win that battle every time. What you're doing instead is retraining your nervous system. You're teaching your amygdala that social disapproval is not a mortal threat. You're building new neural pathways that connect boundary setting with safety rather than danger. You're shifting your locus of control from external to internal through repeated practice. You're developing earned secure attachment by proving to yourself over and over that you can state your truth and survive. The response. This is brain-based change. It's rooted in neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. every time you deliver a boundary statement without spiraling into justification, you're creating a new neural pathway. Every time you sit with the discomfort of not explaining and nothing terrible happens, you're teaching your amygdala to recalibrate its threat assessment. Every time you choose your own values over someone else's approval, you're strengthening your internal locus of control. The brain changes through repetition and reinforcement, not through understanding alone, though understanding helps, but through lived experience, through doing the thing that feels uncomfortable until it starts to feel normal, through proving to your nervous system that the new way is safe over and over until it becomes your default. This is why the tools you've learned work, not because they're clever communication techniques, though they are, but because they're designed to rewire your neurology. The boundary statement interrupts the automatic over-explanation pattern. The pause creates space for your prefrontal cortex to come back online. The redirect teaches your amygdala that you can handle pushback. The rituals of self-trust reinforce your internal locus of control. You're not just changing behavior, you're changing your brain. And that means the transformation can be permanent. Not because you'll never be tempted to over-explain again, but because the new pattern will become as automatic as the old one once was. You'll state your boundary and move on because that's what your nervous system now knows to do. It will feel natural, easy, true. You are safe, even when misunderstood. Your brain is learning that truth right now, one experience at a time. And as it learns, everything changes. Understanding the science is one thing. Applying these tools in calm, low-stakes moments is another. But the real test comes when the pressure is high, when emotions are intense, when the stakes feel enormous. This is where most people revert to old patterns. This is where the urge to over-explain becomes almost unbearable. And this is exactly where you need these tools most. Let's walk through the situations that will test you, and let's prepare you to hold your ground when it matters most. First, conflict. When someone is angry or disappointed with your decision. This is where your nervous system will scream the loudest. Because anger and disappointment are the exact threats your amygdala was trained to avoid. Your entire over-explaining pattern was built to prevent this moment. And now here it is, happening anyway. They're upset. Their voice is raised, or their face is tight, or their disappointment is palpable. And every cell in your body is telling you to fix it, to explain, to make them understand, so they'll stop being upset. But you're not going to do that, because their anger or disappointment is not evidence that you've done something wrong. It's evidence that you've made a choice that doesn't align with what they wanted from you. And that's allowed. You're allowed to disappoint people. You're allowed to make choices that upset them. Their feelings are valid, but they're not your responsibility to fix. Here's what you do instead. State your boundary clearly. I've made my decision. Then acknowledge their feelings without absorbing them. I understand you're upset. Notice the language. You're not saying, I'm sorry you're upset, because that implies you've done something wrong. You're not saying, don't be upset, because that's trying to control their emotions. You're simply acknowledging the reality. They're upset. And then you let that reality exist without trying to change it. And then you add, my decision stands. This is crucial. You're not reopening the discussion. You're not inviting them to convince you otherwise. You're stating a fact. The decision has been made. It's not changing because they're upset about it. If they continue to push, if they escalate, if they demand explanations or try to guilt you into reconsidering, you disengage. I'm not going to discuss this further. And then you leave the conversation, physically, if you need to, or emotionally, by simply stopping your participation. You don't owe anyone a debate about your own life, especially when they're too upset to hear you anyway. This will feel brutal the first time you do it. You'll feel like you're being cruel, cold, uncaring, but you're not. You're being clear, and you're teaching them that your boundaries are real, that your decisions aren't up for negotiation, that their emotional intensity doesn't change your autonomy. Now let's talk about authority figures. Bosses, parents, institutions. These relationships carry extra weight because there's often a power dynamic, a history, or consequences that make the interaction feel more dangerous. With a boss, you might worry that setting a boundary without extensive justification will cost you professionally. With a parent, you might fear losing love or approval. With an institution, you might feel like you need to prove your case to be taken seriously. But the principle remains the same. You offer necessary information, not justification for your humanity. If you need to take a personal day, you don't owe your boss a medical history. "I'm taking a personal day on Friday" is enough. If they ask why, and they might, you can say, "It's for personal reasons," or "I need to take care of something." You don't elaborate. You don't list symptoms or prove that you're sick enough. You don't justify rest as if it's a privilege you must earn. You state the fact and trust that it's sufficient. With parents, especially if you're navigating old patterns where they expect access to every corner of your life, you offer what you choose to offer. I've decided to spend the holidays differently this year. If they demand to know why, if they express hurt or disappointment, you can acknowledge it without changing your decision. I know this is different from what you expected. This is what works for me. And then you hold the line. The key is distinguishing between information that's necessary for the practical functioning of the relationship and justification that's meant to secure approval. Your boss needs to know you're taking a day off so they can plan accordingly. They don't need to know why you're taking it off to approve your humanity. Your parents might want to understand your choices, but you get to decide how much access to grant based on whether they've shown they can respect your autonomy. Authority figures often expect explanations because that's how the power dynamic has always worked. But you're an adult now. You have autonomy. And while there may be consequences to your choices, those consequences don't negate your right to make them. Let's talk about mistakes. Because you're going to make them. You're going to mess up, misjudge, choose poorly. And when that happens, the temptation to over-explain will be intense. You'll want to justify the mistake, to explain all the reasons it happened, to drown your apology in context so they understand it wasn't really your fault. Don't. It dilutes the apology. It makes it about you instead of about the impact of your actions. When you've made a mistake, keep it simple. Acknowledge the error clearly. I made a mistake. I should have done X, and I didn't. Apologize if your action caused harm. I'm sorry. Offer a plan to correct it if possible. Here's what I'm going to do to make this right. And then stop talking. You don't need to explain all the circumstances that led to the mistake. You don't need to beg for absolution or over-justify to prove you're still a good person. Accountability is clean. It's taking responsibility without hiding behind explanations, and it's actually more powerful than a paragraph of justifications because it shows you can handle being wrong without needing to make yourself look better. If the person wants to understand what happened, they can ask, and you can choose to share more context if it's genuinely useful. But lead with accountability, not justification. Now, moments of grief or transition. These are tender times. You're ending a relationship, changing careers, moving to a new city, navigating loss. And people are going to ask why. Some from genuine care, some from curiosity, some from judgment disguised as concern. You can share if you want to. If someone has earned your trust, if opening up to them would bring you comfort or deepen your connection, share freely. But you don't have to perform your pain for their comfort. You don't have to justify your grief or prove that your transition is warranted. "It's what I need right now" is a complete sentence. You don't need to explain the entire backstory of why your relationship ended. You don't need to walk them through every factor that led to your career change. You don't need to defend your grief or prove it's big enough to deserve this response. In these vulnerable moments, over-explaining often comes from a place of seeking validation. You want them to agree that you're making the right choice, that your feelings are justified, that you're not being dramatic or selfish or wrong. But their agreement doesn't change your reality, and their disagreement doesn't invalidate your experience. You're allowed to make major life changes for reasons that only make sense to you. You're allowed to need what you need, even if others don't understand it. And you're allowed to keep the tender parts of your transition private, shared only with people who've proven they can hold them gently. Finally, the hardest pressure of all, the pressure from within. When you're doubting yourself, when your inner critic is louder than any external voice, demanding justification, questioning every choice, telling you that you need to explain yourself better, try harder, prove more thoroughly. This is where you practice the same boundaries you'd use externally. When your inner critic says, "Why did you do that? What were you thinking?" you need to explain yourself. You respond the same way you would to an external interrogator. "I trust my decision," even if you don't fully believe it yet. Even if doubt is eating at you. Even if you're second-guessing everything. You practice the statement anyway. Because confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's the willingness to move forward despite it. It's trusting that you made the best choice you could with the information you had, even if you're not certain it was perfect. Your inner critic doesn't deserve a thesis any more than external critics do. When it demands justification, you can acknowledge the doubt without feeding it. "I hear that you're worried. I'm still trusting my choice." And then you redirect your attention. You return to the present moment. You focus on what's in front of you, rather than spiraling into the endless loop of self-justification. This internal boundary setting is often the hardest work, because you can walk away from external critics, but you carry your inner critic with you everywhere. Learning to set boundaries with your own thoughts, to recognize when you're demanding justification from yourself and choosing to stop. This is mastery. Here's what you need to understand about pressure. It reveals where your foundation is weak. The moments when you revert to over-explaining, when you can't hold your boundary, when you cave to the urge to justify, these aren't failures. They're information. They're showing you where you need more practice, where your nervous system still believes explanation equals safety, where you haven't yet proven to yourself that you can survive being misunderstood. And each time you hold your ground under stress, you fortify that foundation. You add another layer of proof. You teach your nervous system that you can handle anger, disappointment, authority, grief, self-doubt, all of it, without abandoning yourself, without over-explaining, without shrinking. The confidence you're building isn't theoretical. It's not something you think your way into. It's something you earn through repeated experience, through being in the hard moment and choosing differently than you used to, through feeling the overwhelming urge to explain and breathing through it instead, through stating your truth and letting the discomfort exist without trying to fix it. Each time you do this, you're proving something to yourself. You're proving that you can be misunderstood and still be okay, that you can disappoint people and still be worthy, that you can make choices others don't agree with and still trust yourself, that you can exist without constant justification, and that proof, accumulated over time, becomes unshakable. It becomes who you are, not someone trying to be confident, but someone who is, because you've walked through the fire and you know what you're made of. The pressure is coming. It's inevitable, but now you're ready for it. And each time you meet it without over-explaining, you become more ready for the next time. You're building something here, something that can't be taken from you. The knowledge that you can hold your ground when it matters most. Think back to where you started, to who you were before you began this journey. You were exhausted, bone-tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. You were performing constantly, curating every word, every decision, every choice to fit what you thought others needed from you. You were seeking permission from everyone but yourself. Your friends' approval, your family's understanding, your co-workers' validation. The nod from strangers that said you justified your existence sufficiently for one more day. You were constantly rehearsing defenses in your head, lying awake at night, preparing arguments for criticisms that hadn't been spoken yet, walking through imaginary conversations where you explained yourself perfectly and they finally understood, crafting the ideal justification that would make everyone agree you'd made the right choice. You were shrinking, making yourself smaller around certain people, editing your truth, hiding parts of yourself that felt too complicated to defend. You were losing yourself in the noise of other people's opinions, their expectations, their judgments, real and imagined. You couldn't hear your own voice anymore beneath the cacophony of everyone else's. You felt like you owed the world an explanation for simply being yourself, for having needs, for making choices, for existing in a way that didn't always align with what others wanted from you. That's where you were, and maybe you didn't even realize how heavy it was until you started to set it down. But look at you now. Look at who you're becoming. You speak with quiet authority now, not loud, not aggressive, but steady, grounded. When you state what you need, what works for you, what you've decided, there's a calmness in your voice that wasn't there before. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're not performing certainty you don't feel. You're simply stating what's true for you and letting that truth stand on its own. You know now that your worth is not up for debate. It's not contingent on other people's understanding or approval. It's not something you earn through sufficient justification. It's inherent. It exists because you exist. And that knowing has changed everything about how you move through the world. You still offer explanations sometimes, but they're gifts now, not obligations. When someone you trust asks with genuine curiosity, when sharing your reasoning deepens a connection you value, when context serves understanding rather than defense, you share, freely, without the desperate edge that used to accompany your words. You're not trying to secure anything. You're just opening a window into your inner world for someone who's proven they can appreciate the view. You've reclaimed the energy you once spent justifying your existence. That enormous reservoir of mental and emotional resources that used to go toward crafting explanations, managing reactions, defending decisions, performing for approval. You've redirected all of that toward actually living, toward creativity, toward presence, toward joy, toward the relationships and pursuits and moments that make you feel most alive. This isn't just a behavioral change. This is an identity shift. You are no longer someone who over-explains. You're not trying to stop over-explaining while still being someone who does it. You've become someone who trusts yourself, someone for whom over-explaining is no longer necessary because your internal validation is louder than external criticism. And that trust radiates. People feel it even when you're not saying anything. It's in how you carry yourself, how you respond to questions, how you hold your boundaries without apology, how you make decisions and then let them be without spiraling into second-guessing. There's a solidity to you now that wasn't there before. Some people respect it immediately. They appreciate the clarity, the directness, the fact that you're not making them wade through paragraphs of justification to understand where you stand. These people lean in. Your relationships with them deepen because you're showing up as yourself, not as a carefully curated version designed to avoid disapproval. They see you, and you let them. And that's what real connection feels like. Others test it. They push back against your boundaries, uncomfortable with the shift. They ask more questions, demand more explanations, try to pull you back into the old dynamic where you justified yourself, and they got to have opinions about your life. They're not necessarily trying to be difficult. They're just adjusting to a new version of you. And change makes people uncomfortable. And you hold steady. You don't revert to the old pattern to make them comfortable. You repeat your boundary. You redirect. You show them through your consistency that this is who you are now. Some of them adjust. They learn the new terms of relationship. They realize that this version of you, boundaried and clear, is actually easier to be around than the exhausted, over-explaining version ever was. And a few walk away because they didn't want you. They wanted a version of you that was small enough to control, uncertain enough to constantly seek their approval, pliable enough to bend to their preferences. And you're not that anymore. You won't be that anymore. And here's what's remarkable. That's okay. You're not desperately holding on to relationships that require you to diminish yourself. You're not bending yourself into shapes that don't fit just to keep people who don't truly see you. You're letting go of connections that were built on performance rather than authenticity. And in the space they leave behind, you're building something better. Relationships with people who respect your autonomy, who trust your judgment, who don't need you to justify your humanity in order to love you. Let me paint you a picture of daily life in this new identity. Because it's not just theory, it's practical, it's tangible. It's how you actually move through the world now. You set boundaries without guilt. Someone asks something of you that doesn't work. You say no, clearly, kindly, and then you move on with your day. You don't spend the next 3 hours wondering if you should have said yes. You don't rehearse explanations in your head. You don't text them later with additional justifications. You said no. It was true. It's done. You make decisions and let them stand. You choose something, anything, a career move, a relationship boundary, how you spend your weekend, and you let that choice be. You don't poll everyone you know seeking validation. You don't spiral into research, trying to prove you made the right call. You don't constantly revisit the decision looking for flaws. You trust that you made the best choice you could with the information you had, and you let it be enough. You move through the world with less friction. Interactions that used to drain you are simpler now. Someone questions your choice, and instead of launching into defense mode, you just acknowledge and move forward. There's less resistance because you're not constantly bracing for judgment or trying to preemptively manage everyone's opinions. You have less exhaustion because you're not using your energy to maintain a performance. You're not mentally tracking what you've said to whom, making sure your explanations are consistent. You're not carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. You're just living. And living, it turns out, takes so much less energy than performing ever did. There's less noise in your head. The constant background chatter of imagined interrogations, of rehearsed defenses, of what will they think and how do I explain this has quieted. You can hear yourself again, your own preferences, your own desires, your own knowing. It's not that the doubt is gone completely, but it's no longer drowning out your inner voice, and you're still kind. This transformation hasn't made you cold or harsh or uncaring. You're still thoughtful in how you communicate, still considerate of others' feelings, still open to connection and vulnerability with people who've earned that access. But you're no longer performing your humanity for an audience that may never applaud. You're no longer twisting yourself into justifications, hoping someone will finally validate that you are allowed to be who you are. You're just being, and letting that be enough. You've learned the method, the boundary statement that became your foundation, the structure that taught you how to state your truth without apology. You've practiced the tools, the redirect, the pause, the internal check-in, the permission slip, the context filter, each one adding nuance and flexibility to your ability to hold your ground in different situations. You've rewired the reflex, the automatic over-explaining that used to activate before you could stop it. You've interrupted that neural pathway hundreds of times, creating a new default. And now, more often than not, your first instinct is clarity rather than justification. Now it's time to live it, not as something you're trying to do, but as who you are. To show up in your life as someone who doesn't need permission from everyone to know they're on the right path. As someone who doesn't require validation from the crowd to trust their own judgment. As someone who doesn't need understanding from every person they encounter to feel secure in their choices. You've stopped explaining yourself. And in that stopping, in that reclaimed silence where justifications used to live, you've found something you'd lost. Your voice. Not the performative voice that spoke in carefully crafted explanations, but your real voice, the one that knows what it knows, that trusts what it trusts, that speaks your truth simply because it's true, not because it needs to be defended. This voice doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's just a quiet, knowing that guides you without words. But it's yours, unmistakably, authentically yours. And you can hear it now, clearly, consistently, above all the noise that used to drown it out. You're not perfect at this. You'll still over-explain sometimes. You'll catch yourself mid-justification and feel frustrated. You'll have moments of doubt where the old patterns try to reassert themselves. That's not failure. That's being human. The difference is, now you notice. You catch it. And you can choose differently. You can course correct in real time instead of being carried along by an unconscious pattern. You're becoming someone who doesn't need to explain. And in that becoming, you're finding freedom. The freedom to make choices without an audience, to disappoint people without catastrophizing, to be misunderstood without abandoning yourself, to live according to your own values rather than constantly adjusting to everyone else's. This is who you are now. Someone who has reclaimed their autonomy. Someone who trusts themselves. Someone who knows that their life is not a court case requiring constant defense. You've stopped explaining yourself, and you've started living as yourself. Fully. Finally. Free. This is your life now. Claim it. Live it. Trust it. You've earned this. Every uncomfortable conversation, every boundary you held when it felt excruciating, every time you chose silence over justification, every moment you trusted yourself more than you feared their reaction. It all led here, to this version of you who doesn't need permission to exist. Welcome home, to yourself, to your voice, to the life that was always waiting for you to stop defending it and start living it. You've stopped explaining yourself, and in that sacred space where explanations used to live, you've found something infinitely more valuable. You've found you.